Hello and welcome back to Agile Fundamentals by Digital Agility Institute. So in the last video, we talked about various Scrum roles. We talked about the product owner, the Scrum Master, and of course the development team. So continuing with Scrum foundations, in this particular video, we will talk about Scrum events. So the first of the Scrum event, and which we also call the heartbeat of Scrum, is the sprint. Now, what is a sprint? Sprint is a fixed duration of time within which a development team is expected to deliver value at the end of that particular duration. So, as per the Scrum guide, a sprint duration can be of any length between 1 to 4 weeks, which means it can be 1 week, it can be 2 weeks, or 3 or 4 weeks. The minimum is 1 week and the maximum is 4 weeks. That is what we are expected to have as the duration and plan for a goal to be accomplished by the end of that particular sprint, right? So that's about sprint. What does sprint do for a customer or a product owner or the stakeholders that we are actually dealing with, right? So it enables delivery predictability, which means they would know that yes, after this duration, whatever we define, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, every 3 weeks we are going to get something which is working, an enhancement which is a working software in the software development industry, or a working product or a service or an increment which is functional and which can deliver value to the customer after every particular duration of the sprint. And the sprint duration, once decided, is more or less standardized. That means you can decide, yes, we want to do a 2 week sprint or 3 week sprint, and then you don't necessarily change that, because that standardization of the sprint duration is what enables predictability. Then, this is another question that normally gets asked when you talk about Scrum is, can we cancel the sprint in between when we are actually going through a sprint currently? That means, let's say you have a 4 week sprint and you have completed 2 weeks of work that was required for accomplishing that sprint goal. Now suddenly the product owner decides to say that yes, I don't think this particular sprint goal is any longer relevant, and we should really cancel the sprint. So when do you cancel a sprint, right? Can we cancel a sprint? Absolutely yes. When do you do it? Whenever, as a team, and when I say the team comprises, a Scrum team comprises of all the three roles, right? So Scrum Master, the product owner, and the development team. When together as a team, we are very sure that the sprint goal is no longer relevant. That means by even progressing or working another 2 weeks or another 1 week and fulfilling that sprint goal, we are not likely to deliver any value to the customer. Then the Scrum advocates canceling that sprint, right? So whatever effort is put in, that's okay, but you don't want to waste further effort knowing that there is no value coming out of the sprint goal that we are pursuing. So when can we cancel a sprint? Whenever the sprint goal becomes obsolete or irrelevant to pursue further, right? So it is always okay to cancel a sprint if that condition is fulfilled. Okay. Now, during the sprint, what can happen? Because are an agile team and we are focused and open to accepting change even late in the development, the scope may be continuously clarified, renegotiated with the PO even during the sprint, right? If a particular user story does not necessarily provide value, so why do we think we need to pursue this, right? So you can trade off with the PO, you can clarify, you can trade off on the scope of the sprint and the validity and relevance of the sprint goal. And while the current sprint is running, there is an activity called backlog refinement, which we will separately talk about, happens, which takes care of refining the backlog and the user stories and the features within the backlog for the next sprint. That means the product manager owner, along with the team, starts looking at the future scope or scope for the future sprint that is going to come through. And that happens within the current sprint. So there is some time that is kept out even for the backlog refinement. During the sprint, we should try our best not to bring down the quality of deliverables, right? And most importantly, one thing we need to understand is that whatever change comes through, it should not impact the sprint goal. If it impacts the sprint goal, that means the sprint goal is no longer relevant, right? So then you have to cancel the sprint and probably restart the sprint. So you are okay to accommodate the change if it doesn't endanger, that means it doesn't in entirety impact the sprint goal that is agreed, that is committed by the team together, right? So if that is the case, then you have to cancel the sprint. Otherwise, if you have to trade off between a change, that a new user story that is being brought in, you can ask the question to the product owner to say, okay, we are accepting this, but what should go out? How does this align with the product goal? Is it going to enhance the value that we are going to deliver to the customer by bringing in this change? Is our sprint goal still relevant because of this change? So all those questions will need to be asked whenever a change is brought into the overall sprint. So I hope that is about the sprint. Sprint is the heartbeat of Scrum, right? So that is why we are spending good enough time on understanding what sprint is. Okay, the next event we will talk about is sprint planning, right? Sprint planning is where the sprint is initiated. That means you are trying to create or arrive at the sprint goal overall, correct? The plan, who does the planning? The whole Scrum team, the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the development team, that is cross functional, who would be actually undertaking the work, right? And within that sprint planning exercise, usually the sprint planning is like 8 hours for a 4 week sprint, and if you have a 2 week sprint, then it becomes 4 hours. If it is a 3 week sprint, you essentially would need 6 hours. So that is based on amount of work you might plan for that duration of sprint, and the time boxing varies because of the amount of work you would take into that sprint. And that is the reason. So if it is a 4 week sprint, you may need 8 hours to refine the backlog, discuss the user stories, finalize the overall sprint goal that you want to accomplish. So all those actions to be undertaken, you would need 8 hours for a 4 week sprint. If it is a 3 week sprint, then it's 6 hours. If it is a 2 week sprint, then it is 4 hours, right? If it is a 1 week sprint, obviously it is 2 hours. So it is time boxed, and in the sprint planning, the product owner discusses, he or she brings out the backlog items and how they align to the product goal that the product management team is looking to accomplish. And then the team, based on their capacity and availability of effort for the next sprint, will start trying to plan what could be the sprint goal, right? And what is the value that we will deliver at the end of this sprint? What is that as an outcome we can produce? What is the working product, working service, or working software in a software development context that we can produce, and what value will that provide to the customer? How are we going to get it done, right? Then who does what? So what is the capacity we have? Is that good enough for us to accomplish, this goal? Are we overcommitting? Are we undercommitting? So all those discussions would happen within the sprint planning exercise. Okay, so it runs for, as I said, 8 hours for a 4 week sprint, and relatively it would keep coming down based on the duration of the sprint that you are setting for. Okay, so those are the first two events within the Scrum. The next event is about the daily Scrum. So daily Scrum essentially is time box for 15 minutes. That means what happens in a daily Scrum? We just join the Scrum, everybody joins in the team, joins the Scrum, and they talk about how they are progressing towards the sprint goal, right? What is that I'm planning to do for today towards accomplishing that sprint goal? So it actually helps us in getting that transparency that yes, things are progressing well, and if there is some decision that needs to be made and someone has an issue, so it's a forum for us to raise our issues or impediments, is what we call them in a agile terminology. So impediments are nothing but our blockers or our issues which are preventing us in progressing towards the sprint goal that we have planned for, right? So, and here is where we talk about all those elements, right? It's a quick meeting. Yes, this is what we are really, wanting to do today, and this is how what we are planning to do today aligns or helps us in accomplishing our sprint goal. This is the blocker I have, I need some help, so who can help me? So that also can happen. At least outline those blockers, and then the scrum master, if there are any blockers that need to be looked into or impediments that need to be worked upon, then the team member and the scrum master together try to bring in the stakeholders who are required to resolve that impediment, so that the team continues to progress towards accomplishing that goal. So daily scrum is an important event within the scrum as well. So that helps us to really validate, our progress. So it's a inspect and adapt opportunity for the team on a consistent basis, on a daily basis. So that is our third event within the Scrum. Okay, moving on to the next event. So we talked about so far the sprint planning, and the daily Scrum. The next one is the sprint review, right? So sprint review is what? It is an opportunity for inspecting our outcome, right? What we have delivered, does it meet the acceptance criteria that we had initially committed to? Is it meeting the definition of done for the sprint goal, right? And it is a working session, right? You are going to present what all you have done, what all you have accomplished, right? So together, we as a team and our stakeholders whom we are serving, whom we are going to really deliver that outcome, they just come into that particular session and start reviewing, what has been accomplished, right? We also review not just what has been accomplished in terms of the work, what has influenced that what we have accomplished, right? What has changed in the environment around us? Have there people that are left, or what issues came in newly, how we could resolve those, what behavioral patterns we could see as changing, what conflicts came in. So everything is reviewed, not just the work component, the environment within which we are operating, and what has changed within that environment as well, right? And a sprint review is time box for 4 hours, correct? This again is for a duration of 4 weeks of sprint. So 4 hours is what we are looking at for a sprint review, where you go ahead and present and review, get the feedback, review what has, how the environment within which you are operating as a team has changed, during the last sprint. So all those reflections are done and the review happens. You take the feedback, right? It's another inspect and adapt, which happens at the end of the sprint based on the duration that you have committed to, right? If it is 2 weeks, it happens one day before the last day of the sprint, correct? Now, the last one in the Scrum events is the sprint retrospective. Again, it is about understanding how the last sprint went, what is the learning that we are taking from the last sprint, right? And then how that learning can be adapted into our system so that we can do better in the next sprint, right? So in this we talk about basically, overall what went well for us, right, and what did not go well. Now those are the two things: something went well, something did not go well, right? What problems we faced, and what problems we were able to solve, and what problems we are carrying forward, and why, correct? And then we try to think about kind of coming up with a 4 quadrants to say, okay, what is that we did in the last sprint that we want to continue to do in the next sprint also, correct? That is one quadrant. The second quadrant is what is that we had done in the last sprint which is not fruitful as for us, so we want to stop doing it, correct? That is another one. Then third one is about what is that we did in the last sprint which we want to change a little bit. It worked for us, but probably we could have done those things better, and which could result in a better outcome for us. That is something we want to modify, correct? And the last one is about starting something new, which we did not try last time. We want to experiment, and probably that will help us to going forward. So in the end, the 4 quadrants is start, stop, modify, continue, right? So those are the 4 quadrants within which you want to put your learnings from your retrospective that you undertake, correct? And everybody participates in the retrospective. You also look at what assumptions you had made, how many, did they actually result in, did you validate those assumptions, did they occur? If not, then why? How you need to probably, what biases influence those assumptions, correct? And explore the origins of those assumptions, means where did they originate from, what biases are those bringing alive for us as a team, right? And then think about, okay, are these biases valid? Do we need to somehow circumvent this bias and be conscious next time when it occurs for us, correct? And again, this retrospective is time box for 3 hours, and that is the last event of the sprint. So you have 5 events overall. The sprint itself is an event, right, which happens anywhere between 1 to 4 weeks. Then you have the sprint planning, where the product owner and the team come together and they discuss everything in the product backlog and finalize the sprint goal. What is that we want to accomplish, and what is the work that we are taking into the sprint? That is your sprint planning. Then the daily scrum, wherein the people, everybody in the team joins and they keep highlighting what is that we are going to do today, how is it aligned, how are we progressing towards the sprint goal, do we have any problems that we need support on, and how well we are able to track our progress. Correct? That is about daily scrum. Then the sprint review, where you go ahead and present whatever outcome you have accomplished, the results to the stakeholders, take their feedback, understand the deliverables, the quality that you have provided, fit for purpose, fit for use. So all those things will be undertaken in the sprint review. And the retrospective is the last event, which happens on the last day, where you actually are going and trying to understand, okay, this is what we did, start, stop, modify, continue, and put those into all your learnings into those, right? Those 4 quadrants. So those are the 5 scrum events which together form the scrum. Okay, there we come to the end of this particular scrum events topic. And the activity 4. Now, the question we want to ask you is, with the understanding you have developed for the Scrum event so far, can you think what can stop teams from following these events, right? What are those anti-patterns which can influence teams from participating in these events or following in these events, not understanding the significance of these events? So what are those anti-patterns? What can stop the teams from following these? When you listen to this, yes, you are feeling, that yes, all of these are very important. These provide value for the team to be agile, but we do come across situations where teams are choosing one or not choosing one. They may not participate in some events. So what can influence that is the question. So put your thinking hat on and put your reflections on the anti-patterns for teams not following these events. I hope you enjoyed the session that you watched today, and I look forward you to join the next topic, which would be about the artifacts. What are the artifacts? Artifacts are the credible documents that we produce at the during the sprint and at the end of the sprint as well within Scrum, right? So what are the artifacts that we produce within Scrum? That is the topic we will discover in the next session. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you in the next session.